Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. While Victor Newman attends a Vindictive Newman meeting, Lily Winters will desire Kane Ashby's confession. Victor will first prepare for the growing rivalry between Abbott and Newman. Victor is resolved to make his competitor pay a heavy price by launching a serious attack on Jabot since he still harbors resentment for Jack Abbott. Naturally, Victor will be aware that Jack will strike back, so he must also be ready for that. Victor will revise his approach and let the Newmans know what he anticipates from them going forward. The primary Newmans in this story will be Nick Newman and Adam Newman, while Victoria Newman might eventually have a part of her own. Will Kane actually give in to Victor's demands to use his AI software and force him into a partnership? In any case, in Friday's Y&R episode, Kane will be concentrating on Lily. Kane may feel that Victor is pressuring her ex and want to know more since Lily will pressure her to confess. Lily might possibly learn about Kane's meeting with Christian LeBlanc's character, Michael Baldwin, and inquire about it as well. Like Michael, Lily would question what Kane needs fixed if she discovers that he requires a fixer. In any event, Lily doesn't seem to agree that Kane is finished with the corporate turmoil. Although Kane says he wants to focus on making amends with his children, Lily will suspect he still has great plans and even bigger flames to put out. In Friday's Y&R episode, Michelle Stafford's character Phyllis Summers will struggle with overconfidence. Phyllis may run her mouth and jeopardize her position on Kane's squad since her conceit could be her own undoing. Victor's resentful encounter with Phyllis causes her to lose her temper. Victor Newman sat at the head of the Grand Newman Enterprises boardroom table, his piercing gaze surveying the faces of his children as the air grew heavy with unspoken tension. And though his empire had weathered countless storms, he was not in the mood for patience, diplomacy, or sentiment. This meeting was about vengeance, strategy, and his burning grudge against Jack Abbott, who dared to challenge his supremacy in Genoa City's corporate battlefield. So while the dark wood walls of the boardroom seemed to close in with the weight of his authority, Victor outlined his revised plan, one that demanded absolute loyalty from Nick Newman and Adam Newman, both of whom knew better than to underestimate their father's resolve, for Victor harbored no illusions about the dangers of striking Jabot first. He understood perfectly well that Jack would retaliate, perhaps viciously, but Victor, as always, intended to stay 3 moves ahead, instructing his children that Newman Enterprises would go on the offensive by leveraging resources in technology, media, and acquisitions, seizing opportunities before Abbott could even blink. And though Victoria Newman was absent from this particular showdown, Victor made it clear she would eventually be pulled into his war, whether willingly or dragged kicking and screaming, because in his mind, no Newman ever escaped the gravity of his commands. So as Victor tapped his finger on the folder containing projections and intelligence about Abbott's vulnerabilities, the subtle crackle in his voice reminded everyone present that this was personal as much as it was professional, since Jack's past betrayals still stung and Victor would not let history repeat itself without exacting a punishing toll. Yet even as this thunderous Newman meeting unfolded, elsewhere in Genoa City Lily Winters was preoccupied with her own storm, one centered around Kane Ashby, the man who had hurt her, loved her, and continued to haunt her heart, because while Kane claimed to want nothing more than reconciliation with his children and stability away from the cutthroat corporate jungle, Lily had sensed a restlessness in him, a quiet fire flickering beneath the surface that suggested he was neither finished with dangerous deals nor as detached from Newman's orbit as he wanted her to believe. So when Lily confronted Kane at society after hearing whispers of his clandestine meeting with Michael Baldwin, she pressed him relentlessly, her dark eyes narrowing as she demanded to know why he needed a fixer, because she, like Michael, could not fathom what trouble Kane was brewing that required Baldwin's discreet but formidable services, and Kane, cornered by her relentless pursuit of the truth, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tugging at his cufflinks as if buying himself seconds to compose a careful response. Yet Lily knew that his evasions were nothing but smoke and mirrors, so she leaned in closer, her voice low and cutting, urging him to confess, not because she wanted to expose him to the world, but because she still craved transparency from the man she once trusted implicitly. And Kane, torn between protecting her from Victor's suffocating grip and unburdening himself of the pressure building on his conscience, wrestled silently, his jaw tightening as he thought about Victor's proposition to merge his AI software into Newman's arsenal, a demand disguised as an offer. one that could drag him back into the vortex he swore to avoid. And Kane had seen firsthand how Victor devoured allies and enemies alike, so he knew that if he relented, there would be no escape, no halfway loyalty, only total surrender to Victor's dominion. Yet his own survival instincts told him resistance might be futile. For when Victor wanted something, he usually got it, regardless of the cost to those around him. But Lily's determination pierced through his fog of dread, and she reminded him that his children deserved a father who made choices based on love and integrity, not fear and ambition. So Kane, though shaken, offered her fragments of the truth, admitting that Victor was circling him like a predator and that Michael Baldwin had been approached for advice on managing a situation he could not fully control. Though Kane stopped short of spilling everything, wary that involving Lily too deeply might make her a target, but Lily, astute and unyielding, sensed the missing pieces and refused to let the conversation die, reminding Kane that silence would only allow Victor's grip to tighten. And in that moment, Kane realized that Lily was not just probing him out of suspicion, but also because she still cared, though she would never admit it openly. And while their exchange unfolded in hushed tones, across town Michelle Stafford's Phyllis Summers was recklessly entangling herself in trouble once again, her trademark overconfidence driving her to flaunt her supposed importance in Kane's circle. But Phyllis, blinded by her own ego, failed to recognize how precarious her standing truly was. And when Victor crossed paths with her in the Newman lobby, his disdain barely concealed, Phyllis, instead of tempering her tone, lashed out, goaded by the smug tilt of his eyebrow, the sarcastic bite in his words, and the insinuation that she was meddling in games far beyond her pay grade. So her temper erupted, a familiar fire that left her blurting barbed retorts about Victor's manipulative empire. And though she believed herself untouchable, Victor's narrowed eyes and sharp dismissal reminded her, and anyone watching, that those who underestimated him often paid dearly. So by the time Phyllis stormed away, fuming and humiliated, her miscalculated defiance had only tightened Victor's resolve to crush not just Jack Abbott but anyone who dared to align against him, leaving Phyllis vulnerable to fallout she had not anticipated. And so Friday's episode of The Young and the Restless would not simply showcase Victor's vindictive meeting with the Newmans, but also the intricate web of confessions, suspicions, and misplaced arrogance weaving through Genoa City. Kane battling whether to confess fully to Lily or continue dancing with Victor's dangerous demands. Lily torn between trust and fear as she tried to unravel Kane's secrets, and Phyllis jeopardizing everything with her unchecked tongue, proving once more that in Victor's world, conceit was not only unattractive but lethal. And as the boardroom lights dimmed, as Lily's questions hung unanswered in the air, and as Phyllis's temper echoed in Newman's corridors, one truth reigned supreme. Every character caught in Victor Newman's storm would either bend to his iron will or be broken by it. The tension in Genoa City did not fade with the close of Victor Newman's boardroom meeting. Instead, it spread outward like ripples on water, touching every corner of town. And while Victor retreated to his office to brood over strategies and make calls to legal advisors and shadowy allies alike, Nick Newman and Adam Newman exchanged uneasy glances in the corridor, both men acutely aware that when their father declared war on Jack Abbott, collateral damage was inevitable, yet neither was in agreement on how to handle it. For Nick, weary of endless vendettas, muttered that they should be strengthening Newman's reputation through innovation and ethics rather than sabotage, while Adam, ever the pragmatist, reminded his brother that Victor never fought fair and never expected them to either. So whatever moral compass Nick clung to would not keep them from being dragged into the mud. And as the brothers argued in hushed but heated tones, Victor's voice bellowed from within his office, calling Adam inside, which left Nick to fume in solitude, frustrated that his father continued to pit them against one another instead of nurturing unity. And meanwhile, Kane Ashby was not free from conflict either, for after his tense exchange with Lily Winters, he found himself walking the quiet streets outside society, his mind racing, his heart pounding with the weight of choices he had yet to make. And though he wanted to shield Lily from Victor's schemes, he also knew that secrecy would only drive her further away. So when she followed him out onto the patio, refusing to let the discussion die, Kane finally stopped pretending and let his guard slip, his Australian accent thickening as he confessed that Victor had indeed sought him out, that the legendary mogul saw potential in his AI software as a weapon in the corporate war against Jabot, and that Michael Baldwin had been consulted not just as a fixer but as a possible buffer, someone to help Kane navigate the treacherous waters Victor was pulling him into. and Lily's face darkened with worry, her arms crossing as she accused Cain of repeating old mistakes, of once again getting lured into powerful games under the guise of survival. And though Cain protested that he was trying to resist, Lily reminded him of the undeniable truth. Once Victor Newman marked someone, escape was nearly impossible, so the question became not whether Cain would play Victor's game, but whether he could survive it without losing himself, his children, or even Lily's last threads of faith in him. And as their words clashed, elsewhere in town, Phyllis Summers continued to spiral, her earlier confrontation with Victor gnawing at her pride, fueling her determination to prove herself indispensable. So she stormed into Crimson Lights, venting to anyone who would listen about how Victor underestimated her, about how she could outwit him if given the chance. But her ranting only drew raised eyebrows and sympathetic yet skeptical smiles, particularly from Sharon Rosales, who gently suggested that Phyllis should tread carefully before inserting herself deeper into battles that did not belong to her. Yet Phyllis, fiery and stubborn, dismissed the warning, claiming that Cain valued her cunning and that she would secure her place by ensuring Jabot fell before Newman could even strike. But in her arrogance she failed to see that her loud words were already making their way back to the wrong ears. For Newman loyalists and opportunists alike eavesdropped and began whispering, feeding gossip that would eventually land squarely on Victor's desk, setting the stage for her downfall. And as Phyllis plotted her next move with reckless abandon, Victor's true maneuvering began behind the scenes, as he reached out to international contacts, exploring ways to cripple Jabot's overseas divisions, even as he prepared Adam to handle the digital side of their offensive, particularly the possibility of incorporating Cain's AI. Though Victor remained deliberately vague about whether Cain's cooperation would be won through persuasion or brute force, and Adam, ever skeptical, asked if Cain could really be trusted, which elicited one of Victor's famous smirks, the kind that said he already knew the answer but would let time prove him right. While on the Abbott side of town, Jack Abbott was far from blind to the storm approaching, his instincts sharpened by decades of battling Victor. So when Kyle Abbott stumbled into his father's office with talk of new rumors about Newman's aggressive expansion plans, Jack immediately shifted gears, setting aside personal concerns to focus on strategy, calling Billy Abbott into the room and declaring that if Victor thought he could destabilize Jabot, he was in for a rude awakening. And so as the Abbott men rallied, determined to stay ahead of Newman's schemes, Cain found himself caught in the crossfire of two titans, his own conscience torn between Lily's plea for honesty and Victor's demand for compliance. And when Lily pressed him again later that evening, in the quiet intimacy of Chancellor Winter's empty office, she begged him to consider what truly mattered: family, redemption, and integrity, reminding him of how much he had already lost by chasing power in the past. And Cain, moved by her words yet haunted by Victor's shadow, admitted that he wanted to choose differently this time, that he wanted to put his children and his bond with Lily above all else, but he feared it might already be too late, because Victor was not a man one could simply refuse without consequence. And Lily, shaken but resolute, told him that if he allowed Victor to dictate his future, then the cycle would never end, and she refused to stand by and watch it consume him again. So she demanded a confession, not partial truths or vague reassurances, but the whole story, every detail of what Victor wanted, of what Michael had advised, and of where Cain's loyalties truly lay, for only then could she decide whether to stand with him or step away for good. And Cain, staring into her unwavering eyes, realized that he could no longer straddle the line, that silence would cost him more than Victor's wrath ever could. And so with a heavy breath he began to speak, peeling back the layers of secrecy, recounting his meeting with Michael on the train, how he had admitted to Baldwin that he needed someone to help him fend off Victor's suffocating grip, how Michael had warned him that once Victor had a hold of someone, extracting oneself was nearly impossible, and how Cain had nonetheless allowed himself to consider the partnership because the stakes were too high. And as his confession spilled out, Lily listened in silence, her heart torn between anger and empathy. And when he finished, she placed her hand on his, whispering that she believed he could still choose differently, but only if he had the courage to walk away from Victor entirely, no matter the consequences. And Cain, staring at her hand on his, felt the gravity of her ultimatum sink in, knowing that his next choice would define not just his own fate but the future of his family. And as the night deepened over Genoa City, as Victor schemed, as Jack prepared his counterpunch, as Phyllis dug herself deeper into peril, and as Lily waited for Cain's decision, the stage was set for a showdown where love, loyalty, and ambition would collide. And though no one yet knew the outcome, one truth was undeniable. Victor Newman's war would consume everyone in its path, and those who thought they could outwit him, whether Cain, Jack, or Phyllis, would soon discover that Victor's vengeance spared no one, not even those he claimed to love. As dawn broke over Genoa City, the storm clouds gathering inside Victor Newman's mind seemed to mirror the grey sky outside Newman Towers, for he was already on the phone with allies in London and Tokyo, plotting strategic acquisitions that would squeeze Jabot's global reach, his gravelly voice low and commanding as he laid out his vision for a world where Abbott was nothing more than a cautionary tale. And while he issued these orders, Adam Newman watched quietly from across the desk, trying to mask his unease, because though Adam admired his father's cunning, he also recognized the dangers of pushing too far, especially when Jack Abbott had a long history of counterstrikes that could bleed Newman dry if underestimated. Yet Victor, sipping his black coffee, dismissed any hint of doubt, reminding Adam that fear was for the weak and that Newman men were bred to dominate, not compromise. So Adam bit back his retort, choosing instead to silently plot his own contingencies, for he had learned long ago that trusting Victor blindly was a fool's errand. And meanwhile, across town, Cain Ashby sat slumped in the Chancellor Winters conference room, staring at the city skyline as Lily Winters paced in front of him, her frustration palpable, her words sharp yet tinged with concern as she pressed him to make a definitive choice, because she had heard enough half-confessions and evasions, and though she sympathized with the impossible position Victor had placed him in, she reminded Cain that continuing to dance around the truth was only making things worse. So Cain, rubbing his temples, finally admitted that he had considered accepting Victor's demand to integrate his AI into Newman's arsenal, not because he wanted to betray Lily or reignite old ambitions, but because he felt cornered, convinced that refusal would unleash Victor's wrath not only on him but on anyone close to him, and Lily, crossing her arms, snapped that allowing fear to dictate his choices would only guarantee that Victor won, while defiance at least preserved Cain's soul. And though her words cut him, Cain recognized the truth in them, yet he also knew that Victor Newman was not a man who forgave betrayal, so the weight of the decision pressed down harder, leaving him torn between love and survival. And as this emotional standoff unfolded, Phyllis Summers was making her own reckless moves, storming into society with that familiar fire in her eyes, loudly declaring to anyone within earshot that she had a plan to expose Victor's schemes before they could reach Jabot, boasting that she was already piecing together connections between Newman's offshore accounts and potential shell companies designed to cripple Abbott's market share. But what Phyllis saw as bold brilliance was in fact careless self-sabotage, for her words reached Devon Hamilton Winters, who happened to be seated nearby, and though Devon had long tolerated Phyllis's antics, this was different, because Newman and Abbott wars had a way of spilling over into Chancellor Winters' territory, and he had no intention of letting her drag his family's company into the crossfire, so he confronted her, quietly warning that her loud plotting was dangerous. But Phyllis, predictably, brushed him off, insisting that she knew what she was doing, her pride blinding her to the cracks forming in the alliances she claimed to control. And elsewhere, Jack Abbott gathered his allies in Jabot's boardroom, with Billy at his side and Kyle trying to mask the guilt of his own recent missteps. And Jack, his jaw set in that familiar mix of determination and weariness, declared that Victor was on the move again, that Newman Enterprises was preparing a strike, and that Jabot could not afford to be passive. So he tasked his family with digging into every corner of Newman's strategy, warning that Cain Ashby might be a pawn in Victor's game whether he liked it or not. And this revelation left Kyle frowning, muttering under his breath about Cain always showing up in the middle of chaos, though Billy, never one to mince words, reminded him that Cain's loyalty had always been questionable, and Jack silenced them both with a wave of his hand, stating that what mattered was staying 3 steps ahead of Victor, not rehashing old grudges. And back at Chancellor Winters, Cain finally stood, his voice heavy with resignation as he told Lily that he needed time to decide. But Lily, her patience worn thin, told him there was no more time, that Victor's war was already unfolding and that hesitation would only make him a casualty. So she gave him one last ultimatum: walk away from Victor completely, or risk losing her forever. And Cain, his heart aching, realized that she meant it, that this was not just another fight between them but a final line in the sand. And as she left the room, her heels clicking against the floor like a gavel striking judgment, Cain felt the walls closing in, Victor's shadow looming larger, and the fragile thread tethering him to Lily threatening to snap, while across the city, Victor ended his latest call with a rare smile, convinced that his enemies were right where he wanted them, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that his own family, his own allies, and even the pawns he manipulated like Cain and Phyllis were already questioning how much longer they could survive in the orbit of his ruthless ambition.